Hello everyone, welcome to this video. Here I'm going to try to discuss a lot of different concepts, concepts that I don't fully understand even myself because these are so complex that they're beyond human imagination for many of them. But I'll try again to give form to a certain number of ideas and things. So the first thing I wanted to discuss is this issue of incarnation and reincarnation. Why even have incarnations? Well, I've already discussed this in several of my other videos, but understand that if God's source is infinite, and the true sort of form of source or God is an infinitely fast flickering between everything and nothing, everything as waves, energy, vibration, which can then take a specific form if you want, then there is no experience in here. No experience. Why is there no experience? Because God's source is infinite in all of its attributes, meaning that it also has infinite awareness, infinite consciousness. And when you have infinite awareness and consciousness, then you're experiencing everything at the same time. And if you're experiencing everything at the same time, then you're experiencing nothing. Because for every experience, there's a counter experience or an opposite experience. The way to explain this in human terms is the same as if you were experiencing freezing to death and at the same time cooking under the Saharan desert sun. Or if you were born while dying, if you were vomiting while eating, if you were running at the same time as you were sitting, those experiences sort of cancel out. But it's even beyond that, way beyond that. That is, if you just take vibrations, then for every vibration you have a vibration of opposite phase. And so the moment, if you're aware of those two simultaneously, then they cancel each other out, which is why from the point of view of infinity, God's source, to incarnate into the illusion of a finite lifetime, a finite experience, because here, as a human, of course, we talk about infinity, we discuss infinity, but nobody can really, with their mind, imagine what it is and experience what it is fully. Some people say that they lose sense of self, they lose, their consciousness is not longer limited to their body and they expand it out and feel like they're everything that surrounds them. And that is a tiny sort of a tiny insight as to what it feels like to be infinite. Because remember that even if you feel like you're everything, you don't feel like you're everything at the same time. Which means if you really wanted to grasp infinity, you would also be able to feel what was 5 billion years ago at the same time as knowing what happens right now in your present moment, and at the same time knowing what happens 5 billion years from now. And all of the intermediary steps between those, and all of the possible different timelines 5 billion years into the past and 5 billion years into the future. So again, let's talk about incarnation for a moment. Incarnation. And here we'll have to stretch our minds a little bit because this is beyond the dichotomy of true and false. It's beyond that. It's neither true or false, and it's at the same time true and false. So, from infinity God source's perspective, everything takes place at the same time, indeed. But from the point of view of an incarnation, yes, we have time and space, and we are only aware of a tiny fraction of infinity at one point in time. That is the present moment. And while everything happens at the same time, it's not quite accurate because you have points of incarnation. That is moments when God's source can actually enter into this time-space 3D matrix or universe. There are points of entry, and those are, for instance, birth. Those are, for instance, the cell divisions. Those are the birth of new atoms, for instance, or the when a plant germinates. So there are key moments in this universe where God can incarnate, and others where it's much more difficult, if not impossible. And why is that? Well, imagine again taking the view from the point of view of an infinite being. Infinite being tries to incarnate at any point in time in this 3D universe where there is time and space. And there is causality and all that stuff. And that infinite source wants to incarnate at any point in time. Well, right now, as you're sitting at your computer watching this video, why couldn't that moment exists in infinity? Why couldn't God's source just pick up from there? Pick up from you watching your computer screen and this video. Why can't God's source just start from there and then experience from that point on? Well, first of all, understand that there are an infinite number of timelines leading to that very moment where you are watching this video. An infinite. There is a timeline, which is of course absurd, but it exists because in infinity everything exists, where you just popped into existence and you were created inside of an alien-based simulation or a computer. That timeline exists. There is one where you just had soup and you go to watch this video. There's one where you got back from work and you didn't have soup and you're going to watch that computer. There's one where you were wearing a blue t-shirt. There's one where you're wearing a yellow t-shirt. So the problem is, if you're infinite and you incarnate into that being, you don't know which timeline brought you there. You have no idea. And therefore, you have no idea what timeline you're going to go and head to into the future, because future and past have a very special relationship. If you believe, for instance, that you had soup before watching the video, then you're not going to eat soup in this timeline. Like there's a timeline where you're eating soup after watching, and that you're not going to experience that one. So you know what I mean? The past determines the future, and the future determines the past. And so if you don't incarnate at key moments like birth, where you're kind of, the program is sort of erased and you start from the beginning and you build up, you sort of build up past experiences, what you think are past experiences, by simply choosing out of an infinite possible number of experiences the ones that you will remember or the ones that you will experience. And that allows you then and determines how you navigate into the future and what you experience into the future. So, and this is very common sense knowledge, but basically babies are pure potential. Of course, there is a little bit of potential. There's a little bit of determinism, which is genetics and all of that stuff, which I explain by the fact that when I think what happens when you incarnate is that actually your soul stretches through, during the 9 months you're in the womb, for instance, stretches through all of the history of the universe from your timeline and your perspective, where you are at, where your civilization sort of sits, and the understandings they have reached, and they experience everything, all kinds of different things, like being, incarnated in an animal, and whatnot. And then they sort of pop into existence as a human at a certain point in time. And if they have to incarnate later, they do that, all of that again. And this is instantaneous, you could say. It's like a sort of soul programming to prepare them for the incarnation of one specific being, and then they can just do it again, because they only need to limit their perceptions and slow down time once they arrive into this 3D time-space matrix. All the rest they can learn instantly. And it's a bit like, in the movie Matrix, where Neo downloads all kinds of programs of how to pilot a helicopter, how to shoot with guns, martial arts. So you could just say that a soul sort of programs itself, programs certain number of things for its future incarnation instantly by choosing its parents, choosing its DNA, choosing plenty of things, which already restricts somewhat what they can do upon birth. Otherwise, when they arrive in the 3D space, time space, they could manifest things with their thoughts. They could just manifest whatever they wanted with their thoughts, like a TV screen. They want to watch TV. They can just manifest a TV out of thin air. Or they could have telekinetic powers and move objects around, fly objects around in the room. And that would be really weird, because it would violate the kind of history and timeline we're at. And so the soul sort of programs itself very smartly in order to be prepared to deal with wherever you're at in that 3D time space, wherever your civilization, your soul group or soul collective has arrived in terms of consciousness, but still programming possibilities for incremental change and progress. And that's what we've witnessed basically here over the past 200, 1,000 years. You could see that there is incremental change and no revolutionary change, even though if you take someone from 300 years ago and you bring them to today, they would say it's a monumental change. But we witness it as incremental change because we've decided to see 3D time space. Now, this whole message about why should we be happy in this experience? Because understand that from the point of view of an infinite being that has infinite awareness, infinite consciousness, being in the most finite, in the most limited state is actually absolutely exhilarating from its perspective. Because if you're infinite, to have a finite experience where you forget that you're infinite and you don't know what's going to happen and all that is awesome. It's awesome. And it's to explain it in a human way, it's as if this is continuous spoilers. It's as if life was just a continuous set of spoilers, because you know everything. You know everything that could happen. You know everything that you want to happen. It's just, there is no surprise. And we do understand that from a certain point of view, because if someone for instance, spoils the end of Game of Thrones, even though the end is the end. But if someone spoils a series that you really like, you're really pissed. And that is a bit how infinity feels about itself. It just continuously spoils the surprise for itself. Whereas if it takes the point of view of something finite and incarnates, it's freaking awesome. It has no idea what it will get to experience, and it really, really has all of the emotions associated with that finitude. That is, you don't know if it's going to be good, if it's going to be bad, and you feel, fear and whatever. The only reason why today we're talking about ascension and that this game of, feeling emotions and whatever is kind of nearing an end, and we have to get rid of fear, we have to espouse love and all that stuff, is because infinity cannot be, and this is really important, infinity cannot be less than what it already is. You can plaster this on your wall. And what this means is that a finite story which reaches a finite ending, like for instance humanity destroys itself in climate change or a nuclear disaster and war, that's just not possible. You cannot have a real finite story in infinity. In infinity, there is always an infinite story. That is the condition. Even if you're finite, even if you have 3D, time, space, even if you have causality as rules and limitations, you cannot construct a finite story even within those rules. It has to be infinite. And so that's why basically the universe didn't settle with just atoms bouncing around into each other forever. That's why the universe didn't settle with just planets orbiting their suns with just chemical reactions and no biology and no life. That's why the universe is not going to settle on just planets with creatures that roam around for a few billion years, then a comet comes around, destroys the planet, and you start over. That is why the universe is not going to settle with human beings that dick around a little bit on their planet and then self-destruct, and you revert back to whatever primitive forms of biology. Understand that infinity becomes more and more itself as time moves forward in our reality. Of course, it's already infinite. Everything already exists. But in infinity, as I said, if you really take the global view, all that exists is everything and nothing. Everything and nothing, which is one and the same thing, which is no experience. So it's not very interesting. The interesting part is the experience. Another way that I can explain this using metaphors, and I've already explained this in the video about being scared of the future, is here is how it goes. You have the clouds, you have the ground. The cloud represents pure potential, or nothing, The ground represents infinity, or everything. And thunder, lightning, represents us. This is us. And any point in your present, you are sending probes, your thoughts of what should happen, into the future. And eventually, you're sort of advancing, but always towards infinity. And even if this strand is tiny, very, very thin, it will reach the ground no matter what. What this means is that you can either take a straight line down to infinity, which is the same as just like incarnate and, oh, I know I'm God. Okay, I know everything I have to do. I know how to ascend and blah. And within one lifetime, you're God, you're infinity, you're aware of everything. The end. Or you can take a very, very slow route, which is the 3D space-time causality universe, where you get to really experience everything there is into infinity really, really slowly. And you can lose energy in the process, which is just like lightning. If it takes a very, very small, very, very long detour, the lightning rods have to get really, really thin. They have to, there's a certain set of energy here, and then they get really, really thin. So what that means is it can take us 2,000 more years for the ascension process, and many people will have to die, and it's the same as basically stretching this energy very thin instead of just going towards the ground, going towards infinity. And you could see this mechanism, where did I put this, as parallel timelines. Oops. So parallel timelines. This mechanism of lightning are the parallel timelines. So you can think of, here you are in your, and it works at the macro level and the micro level. What does this mean? It means that at the macro level, there is us as a collective, as a planet, going towards infinity, and that stretches into an infinite number of timelines of this sort of collective consensus experience, co-created experience that we're going to experience, quite simply. So there's a collective co-created experience here, and that's also lightning, with plenty of different things where some of these dead end rods is where humanity becomes extinct in a nuclear war. And of course, what happens is that the Earth sort of moves along these timelines based on the attraction that infinity exerts on the story. Because, again, the rule is infinity cannot be anything less than what it already is. But it also works at the micro. So even for your life, at your little human scale, it works in the same exact way, which is there are a million branches from your present that branch out into the future, and you're going to navigate in these branches based on the ideal sort of life that you should be leading. So for instance, here is where you get run over by a car at age 5. Here is you fall in a ski trip, you fall over the mountaintop. And you have also timelines which are fine, but they're longer. For instance, like you marry someone you shouldn't, you have a divorce, but ultimately, it's all about the ideal path for you as an individual to explore infinity as a soul. And you look at what you've experienced of infinity before, of course, that's quote unquote before, because there's no before, but in all of the other incarnations that incarnated at certain points, at certain entry points in this 3D matrix, and what they're living in their present determines what you'll be living in your present, and vice versa. So the future and the past are always in a dialogue. They're always in a dialogue, and that also determines what your future is going to be. For instance, here you risk marrying someone you shouldn't. So what happens is, in your future somewhere here, you go to therapy. There's some hint, the universe sort of hints that you should go for a therapy session to fix a problem that you had in your past that led you to have certain beliefs or certain traumas that would set you on the course of marrying someone you shouldn't. And that therapy is going to set you straight on another path in your life. And so the future and the past continuously enter into a dialogue, and you fix in your past, or you change your perception of the past in order to experience a better future. Better, quote unquote, again, because all there is experience. And if you want to experience a part of infinity where you die run over by a car at 5, from the point of view of infinity, it doesn't matter, because you just pick up from wherever you left off and you go to another incarnation and you just go from there. It's just that there's just so much potential and you're not reaching the full potential, that's all. And it's the same with lightning. Ultimately, it has a certain direction which is going towards infinity, but it can take, detours, it could take longer or whatever, but it's not going to go upwards back into minus infinity, or I don't know how to really say, but it cannot be less than what it already is. That's the rule. So don't know if I've covered absolutely everything I wanted to say. Yeah, just a few more things. So again, for this main collective timeline, it works exactly the same way. By rewriting our past and how the Earth came into existence, we also navigate into certain parts of the future. If you believe that this is just a very materialistic world and a clockwork universe that works with, just science and cause and effect, and there's no magic, there's nothing beyond that, then you get to experience, climate change, fight for resources, nuclear war, end of humanity, the end. If you shift your past and you think now that you've been seeded by aliens and there's more to reality and we're all God, we're in infinity and blah blah blah, and all this spiritual awakening and ascension, that steers us into another timeline in the future where humanity thrives and continues. So again, this true vs false, there's two S's here. This true versus false dichotomy does not exist. Understand that both are true. We are maybe living in a materialistic world that is very deterministic and not just pure mainstream science, blah, blah, blah. It's just that it's going to steer us into a dead-end kind of story. That's all. In infinity, that experience exists, that world exists, that potential exists. The thing is, we've already experienced it, for the last 300 years, so to speak. We had this moment where we experience a universe from the point of view of very hardcore, this cause and effect, Popperian, basically the conditions for a scientific discovery, to be able to falsify the experience, reproduce it, blah, 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 blah. We've experienced that for 300 years. And now we can move on from that experience to experiencing something else where we remember that we're God. And then maybe here at that point of inflection, we'll forget again and we'll go into another direction where, God knows what happens, So it's just, you're just changing your beliefs or your point of focus of what you think is true, when everything is true actually, but you just change your focus in order to steer and navigate in infinity. Steer your story, your collective story, in a certain direction. And you're kind of forced to give this a form, because if you don't, then you're lost in infinity. You just don't know where to go. You could say that you would be aware of every single possible timeline. You'd be sitting at that crossroad and you'd just be stuck there for an eternal present, frozen in time. You have no idea which way to go. Should I go where, humanity becomes extinct? Should I go to where we thrive? And from the point of view of infinity, it doesn't matter. Those are all parts of itself. Let's choose something that we all sort of agree on and we want to experience. And it doesn't matter what it is. It's just, it has to be infinite. That's the only condition. And that's what's going to happen regardless, actually. What I believe is that it's going to be infinite anyways. Maybe even this story is infinite. That is, yes, humanity we self-destruct, but then we wake up, of course, in another form, which is after death. You sort of go back to your energetic body, and from there you resume and you play out another story. But apparently that's not what we want to experience. We want to experience something where we have a sort of continuity between 3D, the 3D timeline, and then a smooth transition to another dimension, instead of this break where you just all die and then we start over and in another dimension. So it's what we've chosen to experience from infinity. And why not? Why not? It's going to be interesting, not more or less interesting than, just dying suddenly from a nuclear attack, waking up and then resuming your adventure as a soul from that point. But, it's the experience we want to have. Yeah, so this brings me also to my last point. What about free will? If I said that, I just said that the rule is that infinity cannot be anything less than what it already is, and that there is a point of attraction for this lightning rod. That is, it cannot just go like up into the sky or just go like this, you know. It is attracted by infinity from pure potential, from pure nothingness into infinity. So does that mean that the future is predetermined? And here, again, I would say that if you look at the lightning rod, there are actually many different paths that lead to the same point. So free will is simply you can choose pretty much to do whatever you want, but you're still going to go back to infinity. There's just no escaping that. And you could say that, oh, that's very deterministic, but from our point of view as humans, it still means that in our lifetime, we have the possibility to make a near infinite number of decisions and it'll still check out. So is that really limiting? Is that really limiting? From our perspective, not really. If you have a near infinite amount of choices, or maybe even infinite amount of choices from our point of view, and which still leads back to infinity regardless, it's pretty reassuring and you still have free will. And the way I sort of explain this, how you can still have free will and have a set result, is this as within so without kind of metaphor. Again, look at your body. Imagine if you just cut yourself with a knife. And the womb has to be, you're dripping blood, and the womb has to be sealed and disinfected. And so you have little white blood cells that come and fix your womb. Do you think they have free will? Or do you think every single white blood cell has a predetermined destiny where it's already predetermined which white cell is going to disinfect that womb at which place, exactly attack which bacteria that is coming in to contaminate your body, and it's all scripted? And the answer is, of course not. Our cells have free will also, just like us. It's just that the body, us, our body has a sort of a higher intelligence so that it knows how many white cells it has to produce in excess for there to be a 99.99999% probability that that womb is going to be disinfected, regardless if one white cell wants to just lie around and do nothing and dick around and fool around, or one white cell decides to go the other way, and white cell decides to commit suicide, whatever. It will always guarantee that the end result, is guaranteed. The end result, that is, your wound is disinfected, is guaranteed. But the process of how that happens, there are an infinite number of ways that it can happen, and all of those white cells still have sort of free will to do whatever they want. Of course, being white cells is already sort of limiting in the sense that it already restricts their behavior to a certain number of patterns, which makes this kind of manageable. And by the same token, us being humans, even though there are a near infinite number of things that we can do and react to certain situations or take certain decisions, there are certain decisions that you can't do, like for instance fly into the clouds, or become a human bomb and self-explode your own body, or manifest things with your thoughts. So we are still limited in the fact that we're human. And you could say that God source, the universe, whatever, the collective organism that we are a part of is so intelligent, so smart, that whatever end result it needs for humanity to heal, to ascend, to reach this kind of point where we behave as a global organism, is guaranteed in as 99.9999999%. And if not, Don't forget that you can still die. For instance, you can still die if your womb doesn't get disinfected and then the bacteria comes and whatever. That's one experience. It's just a very, very small probability that you're going to experience the finite, non-infinite story. And we're reaching, just to seeing that we're talking about ascension means that it has kind of checked out in a sort of a magical way where we have escaped all of the dead-end timelines that we were set to experience, and we're headed towards infinity. And the reason why many channelers or psychics or whatever still talk about doomsday scenarios is because they still think in terms of majority. Majority voting and beliefs. It's like if, for instance, if humanity as a collective believes at 90% that they're going to experience World War III, they think that because 90% of people think that, that is what you're going to experience. But lightning doesn't work that way. It's not because one branch of lightning is thicker that that's the one that's going to reach the ground. And it's the one that reaches the ground which is going to attract all of the energy, the lost energy that is going into a dead end, back to the main thread, which maybe was the 10% timeline. So it's not about majority thinking. It's about which thread, which lightning rod is the one that is going to hit the target or the ground. And understand that this process is not something that happens every 2 years or whatever. It happens infinitely at every single point in time, which means that is how our present even actually is sort of in motion. Is because you navigate through infinity all the time. Here is how I will represent it. And this is very complex, but this is just one slice of the present, and you are here. And there you have selected one past that leads you to that point, and there are an infinite number of futures ahead of you. And what you do is you just see which one of those is getting closer to infinity, and then you move slightly here. And this is like 1 millisecond after this present moment. Now you're here. And again, there are an infinite number of timelines which guide you to that point. And there are again an infinite number of even different timelines than the ones from this point of view that span out from that point in time in your present moment. And again, you're going to select one here, and then you advance like this. You're not going anywhere, actually. This is an eternal present, and you're just navigating inside infinity and choosing which part of infinity you're going to witness based on what you think your past is. And you can actually correct that. You can actually reinterpret history, believe that your past is this, and that allows you to shift and sort of jump to a different present moment where you have more possibilities. For instance, this is what happens when we went from dogmatic religion to science as the main dogma. It actually was almost a quantum jump of our present from one timeline where we just listen to priests into infinity for eternity, and then a comet comes around and just wipes us off the face of the earth, to a quantum leap to another completely different eternal present where suddenly we can build rockets, go to the moon, have missiles to defend against asteroids. And so by rewriting your past, which is thinking that we weren't created by God, and there is no God in the cloud sort of punishing us, and there's no heaven and hell, to atheist science point of view, allows you to shift radically your eternal present to experience another part of infinity. And that was necessary. And now it's necessary to do another quantum shift where we rewrite the past. We understand this whole process, which allows us to have so much more freedom in what we're going to experience as a future. And it happens again at macro level, at micro level. For your own life, it works that way. By completely reinterpreting your past, you can experience a quantum shift in your own experience of the future. And yeah, I think I'll end with that. I hope this was a useful video. It's still something that is very, very, very complex and mind-boggling, which means that in the sense that in infinity, everything that you can ever imagine exists. Oh, maybe just one last thing that that I really wanted to talk about, and this one is also very complex. I think this 3D timeline and this limited, this rules of cause and effect is what serves as an anchor for infinity to explore itself. Because from our point of view, we can imagine all the series like Game of Thrones, all of the movies, the films, all of the absurd stories that could never exist from our timeline. And so from our timeline, we sort of, with our thoughts, with whatever we create a series, we give birth to an infinite number of universes which could not sort of explore themselves as we have, because they do not have this cause and effect rule, which makes it really difficult for them to sort of, they don't have these limiting rules which allows for this continuous and structured and logical way of sort of gradually building up consciousness. They just pop into existence the moment that you think about them, and they can start experiencing themselves from this one timeline, which is our timeline. So Game of Thrones, that world actually does exist. Because in infinity, everything exists. It's just that parts of infinity, you have to be strategic. Infinity is strategic about how it finds the best strategy to experience all that it is. And by creating this timeline where it forgets what it is and it gradually remembers, and it has this set points of incarnation, it has all of these rules, that strategy allows it to explore all of the other universes, all of the other potentials, all of the other stories. Like, for instance, here, you could say just the fact of me imagining two dinosaurs sitting around and sipping coffee around a table 5 billion years ago, even though it's impossible, it actually exists. And me, by saying this, by having that thought, it's almost as if I'm organizing or sorting infinity. And I'm allowing infinity to feel or to experience what it is to be two dinosaurs sipping coffee 5 billion years ago. Because it couldn't do it by itself, because again, there's no point at which it can start that experience or think of that experience or decide to start experiencing that experience from that point onwards. It can't, because it's infinite. And so it needs a finite being that has a finite understanding of reality to imagine finite things with a finite starting point and like a finite ending and something in between. So God's source was also thrilled to watch Game of Thrones and maybe disappointed in the end, just as much as we were, because thanks to our timeline and us forgetting that we're God, we are imagining and thinking into existence all of the parallel infinite universes that do not have a starting point, that cannot exist without something or someone, some finite being on another timeline, giving them the impetus for starting their experience. Because it comes back to what I was saying at the very beginning. If you're infinite, you don't know where to start. And you have to find these kind of points of incarnation that are strategic for you to enter and start experiencing. And from that vantage point, from that finite vantage point, create, infinitely create in all directions. I hope it also gives you a completely new understanding and meaning for why there was even this creation of this 3D timeline with cause and effect and all these kind of rules in the first place. It's the only way. It's the only way that infinity can experience itself, not only in this timeline, but in all other timelines where there otherwise would not be any starting point to the experience from which to experience anything. Again, sorry if this was unclear. It's even difficult for me to explain because time, space. It's just things that this goes way beyond any of this. So hopefully it made sense. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask.